Hey guys, and welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight, we're embarking on a truly vast journey, one that takes us back to the very origins of Western thought, and we're going to explore the entire story of Greek mythology from the swirling chaos before time began to the everyday lives of the gods and the enduring legacies of the heroes and concepts they shaped. Now dim the lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's begin our exploration of a world where the divine walked among mortals, often with dramatic and unpredictable results. Before we dive into the grand cosmic drama, the birth of gods and the clashes of titans, let's take a moment to ground ourselves to feel the dust of the ancient. For the common person in ancient Greece, mythology wasn't just a collection of fanciful tales. It was the very fabric of existence, a living explanation for everything from the shifting seasons to the sudden wrath of a storm. Imagine yourself not as a hero or a king, but as an ordinary individual, perhaps a farmer, tilling the rocky soil of Attica, or a potter shaping clay by a slow-flowing river, or a fisher on the glinting Aegean Sea. You wake before dawn, not to the gentle hum of an alarm, but to the insistent crow of a rooster, a sound that in its raw simplicity might remind you of the untamed nature that surrounded you. Your bed is likely a simple straw pallet, perhaps covered with a rough wool blanket, a far cry from the modern comforts. There's no soft mattress, no Egyptian cotton sheets. The air might be cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from the nearby communal hearth. As you rise, your bones might ache from a day of labor, a familiar companion in a life dictated by the sun, the soil, and the often unpredictable elements. Your very survival depended on the whims of the gods. Was there enough rain for the crops, or would Demeter hold back her bounty in a moment of sorrow or pique? Would Poseidon grant calm seas for your fishing boat, or would he in a fit of pique churn the waters into a deadly tempest? Even the simple act of lighting your morning fire, coaxing a flame from embers or tinder, carried with it the echo of Prometheus's audacious gift, a constant unspoken reminder of both divine generosity. Life was a cycle of rituals, not grand elaborate ceremonies for most, but small personal acts of reverence. A few drops of water poured onto the ground before drinking a tiny offering to the spirits of the land. A prayer whispered to Hermes before embarking on a journey asking for safe passage. You might sacrifice a small portion of your meager meal, a bit of bread, or a splash of wine to a household god, or a specific Olympian you felt a particular connection to, hoping to curry favor or simply avoid. The landscape itself was alive with divine presence. Every grove of trees might shelter a dryad, every mountain a nymph, every spring a deity. You walked with a subtle awareness, a cautious respect for the unseen inhabitants of your world. A sudden rustle in the leaves might be the wind, or it might be a god in disguise. A fleeting shadow, the swift passage of a divine messenger. This pervasive sense of the sacred infused daily life with a kind of watchful wonder, a constant quiet reminder that you were never truly alone, and that your actions, however small, could attract the notice. It was a world where the extraordinary was always just beneath the surface of the ordinary, and where the line between the mundane and the miraculous was wonderfully, terrifyingly thin. From the quiet earthbound life of a mortal, let us now lift our gaze and drift back far beyond the first flickering human hearths to the very dawn of creation. Before the gods, before heroes, before even the concept of time as we understand it, there was simply nothing. Or perhaps, more accurately, everything and nothing all at once. The Greek myths begin not with a voice from the heavens or a bolt of creation, but with capital C chaos. Imagine this, an endless, formless void, a vast, empty potential where no sky met no sea, where light and dark were yet undifferentiated concepts. It was the quiet before everything, a primordial soup, and then, slowly, subtly, like the first stirrings of a great dream existence, began to unfurl itself. From this boundless emptiness, a gradual unfolding, not a sudden explosion, but a deep, resonant hum of becoming. Not merely soil and rock, but a vast, conscious entity, broad and eternal, steady beneath all that would one day walk upon her, all that would spring from her. She was the foundational mother providing substance and stability to the nascent cosmos, a quiet but undeniable presence. Alongside her emerged Tartarus, not a physical place in the way we might think of a cavern, but a shadowy depth beneath the world, more abyss than physical location. It was a chasm, a primordial prison, a dark counterpoint to Gaia's solid form, its very existence hinting at the punishments yet to come. And then there was Eros. Forget the winged cherub of later romance. This was Eros as a raw, fundamental force drawing things together, setting creation itself into motion, the gravitational pull of attraction that allowed anything to become more than formless dust. From these first foundational beings, others began to stir. Erebus, representing darkness, and Nyx night, emerged, shrouding the nascent world in a thick, velvety gloom. But even from them came the first inklings of light and day, Hemera day and ether light, establishing the first grand. And then, in a moment of profound significance, Gaia brought forth her most important child, Uranus the sky. He arched above her a magnificent canopy of stars and cold, clear air, a vast overarching entity that formed the first true partnership for creation. The sky was no longer just empty space. It was a physical presence, a protective, encompassing dome. With Gaia and Uranus united, the world began to fill. And here is where things, as they often do in family sagas, started out lovely and got complicated rather quickly. Gaia and Uranus bore 12 magnificent children, 6 daughters and 6 sons, collectively known as the Titans. These weren't just powerful beings. They were immense elemental forces reflecting their primordial parentage. Oceanus, for instance, wrapped the world in a ring of water, the vast encircling river from which all fresh water was said to spring. Hyperion carried the sun across the sky, his domain associated with light and watchful observation, a precursor to the later, more defined sun gods. Themis embodied divine law, but Uranus, the sky father, harbored a deep discomfort. He found these powerful progeny unsettling. Perhaps they were too large, too loud, too vital for his static overarching nature. Or perhaps a familiar tale in an act of profound cruelty and unnaturalness, he shoved his children back inside Gaia, imprisoning them within their mother's body. This caused her immense agonizing distress, the world itself groaning under the burden of its unhatched powerful offspring. Gaia, burdened and in pain, could not endure this unnatural imprisonment. She forged a great sickle from stone, a weapon of raw, liberating power, and appealed to her trapped sons for help. Yet fear, or perhaps a quiet resignation, kept them silent. All that is except for Cronus. He possessed a sharp mind and a patient nature, dangerous traits in combination. He was cunning, ruthless, and willing to act where others faltered. In a terrible, decisive moment, Cronus leapt from the shadows, and with one brutal, terrible stroke, he castrated his father, Uranus, flinging the remains into the churning sea below. It was a violent, cosmically significant act, a brutal severing of the primal bond between Earth. From Uranus's spilled blood, where it struck the fertile Earth, new fierce beings emerged. The Erinyes, grim avengers known as the Furies, the powerful giants, and the Malii nymphs of the ash trees, their dark, vengeful nature forever tied to the very ground that bore them. But the consequences of this act were not entirely grim. Where Uranus's flesh drifted into the sea, unexpected beauty arose. From the foam, shimmering and radiant, emerged Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, fully grown and captivating. A paradox, wouldn't you agree? With Uranus overthrown, Cronus ascended to power, freeing his siblings and establishing his rule as Lord of the cosmos. This period, surprisingly, was described as the Golden Age, a time of innocence and harmony. Humans newly formed and simple lived with, but the dark shadow of his father's dying curse clung to Cronus. Uranus had prophesied that Cronus, too, would be overthrown by his own child. This mirrored his own ascent and fueled a deep, corrosive paranoia. To avoid repeating history, Cronus devised a chillingly traditional solution. He decided to eat his children. He married his sister Rhea, a common if somewhat disconcerting practice in divine circles. One by one as they were born, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, Cronus swallowed them whole, trapping them inside the dark of his belly. Imagine Rhea's growing horror and despair, losing child after child to this monstrous act. But when her sixth child, Zeus, was born, she came up with a desperate, clever plan. She wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Cronus, who in his paranoia and haste swallowed it without checking. Zeus, meanwhile, was whisked away to the island of Crete, hidden in a deep, cool cave. There he was secretly raised by nymphs and nurtured by the divine goat Amalthea, fed on her rich milk, a hidden seed of defiance. He grew taller, stronger, fed, loved, and trained in secret listening to whispers and stories of the siblings he had never met, fueling a quiet, burning resolve for liberation. Hidden away in the cool, echoing depths of the cave on Crete, Zeus grew. He wasn't merely getting older, he was absorbing the very essence of his destiny. The stories whispered by the nymphs, the rich, nourishing milk. When the time was ripe, Zeus left Crete. He didn't burst forth in a blaze of glory, not yet. Instead, with a cunning that would become his hallmark, he entered the court of Cronus in disguise, taking on the unassuming role of with the quiet but potent help of his grandmother, Gaia Zeus slipped a potion into Cronus's wine, something bitter, ancient, and mildly volcanic, designed not to harm but to utterly purge. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Cronus began to cough, then gag, his massive form heaving. Then, with a noise that would echo in the halls of Olympus for generations, a sound of guttural discomfort mixed with... The reunion was dramatic, certainly, but the overwhelming emotion was one of cold, hard resolve. These children of Cronus stood together, not meek or grateful, but fully divine and very, very angry. The air crackled with a silent certainty war was inevitable. This was the beginning of the Titanomachy, the epic decade-long war between the old gods, the Titans, and the new generation, the Olympians. It wasn't a quick skirmish. It was a prolonged, brutal conflict that shook the very foundations of the Imagine the vast scale of this conflict. Two opposing camps dominating the horizon, their divine energies clashing, visible even to the few nascent mortal eyes below. For a long time, the war was a stalemate. The Titans were strong, ancient, and terrifying, embodying the raw, untamed forces of the primal world. But the Olympians were clever, resourceful, and the world itself suffered under the relentless strain. The very earth cracked and groaned as if the bones of Gaia herself were being tested. Lightning, not yet fully Zeus's dominion, cracked across a sky that had no business being so angry, tearing rents. At night, the stars themselves seemed to flicker with fatigue, reflecting the sheer exhaustion of both sides in this cosmic struggle. The Titanomachy was a war of attrition, wearing down not just armies, but the very essence of creation. Gaia, the ancient mother who had birthed both titans and gods, had grown weary of the endless conflict. It was then when Zeus himself began to feel the heavy weight of the prolonged war that Gaia chose to intervene again. In his dreams, her ancient voice, a whisper as old as time, reached him. "If you want to win," she urged him. Her words were cryptic, yet infused with an undeniable urgency, hinting at powers far older and more formidable than even the Titans themselves, bound in forgotten abysses. The fate of the cosmos. Gaia's whispered advice resonated with Zeus, a strategic insight that cut through the weariness of the endless war. "Go deeper," she had urged, and deeper he went. He descended into Tartarus, not a metaphorical journey. Imagine a realm so deep that even echoes were reluctant to visit, where the silence was not peaceful, but heavy, oppressive, thick with ages of forgotten darkness. Here in this abyss, creatures older than fear itself were bound in. First, Zeus found the Hecatoncheires, massive beings of immense strength, with 100 arms each and 50 heads. They had been imprisoned not for malice, but for their These liberated beings, in their awe and boundless appreciation for Zeus, became the ancient world's first tech startup, so to speak. They had been imprisoned for their raw power and skill, and now they would unleash it in favor of their liberator. The Cyclopes, masters of the forge, crafted gifts of unimaginable power for the three brothers who would imagine the sheer devastating power of this weapon, capable of carving rivers into mountainsides, its crackle the very sound of divine fury. For Poseidon, armed with these new potent divine tools, the tide of the Titanomachy turned decisively. The Olympians, no longer merely clever, now possessed overwhelming elemental power. Their final assault on Mount Othrys was a cataclysmic display of divine might. Zeus, with his newfound thunderbolt, hurled bolts of searing energy that carved new rivers into mountainsides, ignited forests, and shattered ancient peaks. The sky wept fire and thunder, a deafening symphony of destruction. Poseidon, wielding his trident, cracked open the earth, summoning walls of Cronus, the deposed king, fought fiercely, a desperate, defiant last stand of the old order. But Zeus struck him down, not with a flourish or a prolonged struggle, but with one blinding strike of a sky-forged fury, a single absolute blow that ended his reign. With their leader fallen, most of the remaining Titans were cast into Tartarus, chained behind walls of black stone, watched eternally by the very Hecatoncheires they had once imprisoned. The finality of their imprisonment was absolute, a chilling reminder of Zeus's decisive victory. Only a few Titans escaped this eternal punishment. Themis, the goddess of law who had wisely remained neutral throughout the conflict, was allowed to walk free, her abstract domain of justice, enduring regardless of who ruled. And Prometheus, whose name but Atlas, for his unwavering leadership against the Olympians, for his refusal to bend, received a special eternal punishment. He was condemned not to hold up the earth as is often mistakenly thought, but to hold up the sky on his shoulders, a job without days off or proper lumbar support. An eternal, physically demanding. With victory secured, the gods turned to the world they had so violently reshaped. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, cast lots to divide the realms. It was a seemingly random act, yet universally accepted a practical divine. Zeus, by virtue of drawing the sky, received dominion over the winds, the clouds, the rolling thunder, and the vast vault of stars. Poseidon took the sea, the depths, the storms, and all that swam or drowned within its vast churning embrace. And Hades quietly and without protest accepted the underworld, a solemn realm of endless mist and shadow, where the dead arrived. His kingdom did not end, and neither did his watch. The earth itself was left to be shared not out of kindness, but as the myths dryly suggest, because they couldn't quite decide who would clean it. This peculiar shared status of the mortal realm would ensure its constant entanglement in divine affairs. Mount Olympus, high above mortal reach where storms danced and the air was thick with the scent of ambrosia, became the seat of the new gods. It was here that they would rule, fight, feast, and make poor decisions that would echo through mortal lives for centuries. With the cosmic order firmly established, Mount Olympus now buzzed with the vibrant, often volatile energy of the 12 Olympian gods and a few rotating extras. Zeus, having secured his throne after the titanic struggle, took up his position with an air of supreme. He was the undisputed ruler of the skies, the clouds, the wind, the rain, and the thunderous storms. Every roll of thunder was his voice, every flash of lightning his will. He was also the god of law, order, and that distraction almost invariably involved mortal women or nymphs, or occasionally things that only vaguely resembled them, manifesting as swans, golden showers, or some deeply questionable combination thereof, leading to a spectacularly chaotic domestic life that would become legendary. Beside him, Albeit often with a palpable reluctance and several raised eyebrows, sat Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and family, and the patron of eternal grudges. Their marriage was an ongoing diplomatic crisis, a celestial soap opera. Hera was proud, sharp, and deeply committed to her role. This fury was rarely directed at Zeus himself, who was, after all, the king. Instead, her wrath, cold and precise, fell upon the women he seduced, and the poor children they bore, acting as a divine, uncompromising force of consequence. This often meant banishment, torment, or the slow. Then there was Poseidon, lord of the sea. Less overtly dramatic than Zeus, but far more volatile. His palace, a magnificent structure of coral and pearl, lay beneath the ocean, surrounded by playful dolphins and silent ancient sea beasts. Poseidon wasn't inherently unkind. He had a soft spot for horses. Hades, ruler of the underworld, preferred the company of shades to that of his boisterous siblings. His realm was a place of endless mist and shadow, where the dead arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, tended to the earth with a calm, maternal, and warm presence. She made crops grow and seasons turn, and when she walked, the field's grain sprouted behind her feet. Yet her gentle nature was not to be trifled. Two other crucial figures emerged from divine unions: Apollo and Artemis, the radiant twins. Apollo, god of the sun, music, prophecy, and medicine, played the lyre with divine perfection, and his oracle at Delphi. Then there was Ares, the god of war, embodying the raw chaos of battle, blood rage, and clanging armor. Where Athena was war's strategist, Ares was its tantrum. He was strong, loud, and frequently wounded in embarrassing ways, finding him irritating even to Zeus and everyone else. His domain was his brother Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge, was born lame, and it is said cast from Olympus by his own mother, Hera, for his deformity. Yet he learned to create beauty from pain. His hands, calloused and strong, forged the weapons of gods and heroes, built automatons of gold, and crafted palaces of impossible. Aphrodite herself, born from sea foam and divine scandal, ruled over. Finally, Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, arrived late to Olympus, but with great enthusiasm. His festivals would soon sweep across Greece like wildfire, a potent mix of joy and delirium, embodying the thin line between celebration and frenzy, the god both freeing and dangerous. Together, these 12, along with a few rotating extras, became the Olympians, a dysfunctional, vengeful, hilarious, and deeply theatrical family. They shaped the weather. Fate, love, and every city had its patron. Every aspect of life, from the harvest to the marketplace, was under divine purview. They were not distant deities, but intimate, volatile, and utterly captivating forces that woven themselves into the very fabric of. After the cataclysmic clash of the Titanomachy, the earth, though no longer groaning under the weight of imprisoned titans or shaking from divine warfare, was eerily quiet. It was a world waiting, a canvas primed for something new. There was no intelligence gazing up at the stars, no stories told by firelight, no fear or reverence. The gods had a kingdom, a magnificent seat on Olympus, but they lacked an audience, someone to witness their glory, their squabbles, and their increasingly elaborate dramas. It was into this void that Prometheus stepped. Prometheus the Titan, whose name meant forethought, saw this emptiness and felt it more acutely than any other. He was not swayed by the immediate concerns of power or dominion. His vision extended to a future. He found a quiet river bank where the clay was rich and pliable, and began to shape it. This was not an act of arrogance or ambition, but one born of careful precision, the focused attention of an artist, and the quiet awe of a parent. When the forms were ready, clay figures lying still and expectant on the riverbank, Prometheus breathed life into them. This was no mere breath of air, but a divine spark, a soul, the nascent seeds of thought and fire. These were not animals governed by instinct. They were not gods, immortal and omnipotent. At first, they were clumsy. These early creations, stumbling through the forests, confused and curious. They lacked natural defenses. No sharp claws, no thick fur, no fearsome fangs. They feared the dark, the biting cold. From his lofty throne on Olympus, Zeus observed Prometheus's creations with a less impressed eye. "They look like us," he commented, his voice thick with suspicion. He saw not ingenuity, but an unsettling similarity, a potential challenge to divine authority. "They're weak," he scoffed. "Look at them. They don't even know how to survive." Prometheus, however, saw their vulnerability not as a flaw, but as a yet Prometheus, ever the one with forethought, stole it anyway. One night he crept to the hearth of Hestia, the gentlest of the Olympians, and with a silent, determined movement plucked a single smoldering coal from the eternal flame. He tucked it carefully into a hollow fennel stalk, a humble vessel for such a precious, dangerous gift, and descended from the heavens. With his precious, smoldering gift, he returned to humanity. The world changed the moment fire touched mortal hands. With fire, humans transformed. Smoke rose from their hearths, quiet pillars against the night sky like prayers or a silent collective defiance. Fire became a symbol of everything that made them different from beasts, everything that hinted at the divine within them, an inherent spark of creativity and will. Zeus's fury when he discovered the theft was thunderous. "You gave them fire!" he roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of Olympus. "They will challenge us. They will forget to fear. They will flourish." Zeus saw not the dawn of human progress, but a direct. The Titan was then dragged to the highest, most desolate peak of the Caucasus Mountains, a cruel, stark landscape of rock and wind, a permanent monument to divine retribution. There each day an eagle, a monstrous divine bird of immense size, would descend and tear into Prometheus's side, devouring his liver. Each night, the wound would miraculously heal. Yet Prometheus did not beg. He did not repent. For in the far, far distance, through the mists and the endless pain, he could still make out the faint, persistent plumes of smoke rising from human villages. His suffering, he believed, was a fair price. Prometheus had given humanity fire, a gift of warmth, knowledge, and potential. But Zeus, in his boundless fury and desire for retribution, would now give humanity a gift of his own, a gift wrapped in beauty, charm, and devastating danger. He sought not to destroy humanity directly, but he called upon Hephaestus, the master craftsman, and other gods to fashion a woman from clay. She was not born naturally, but meticulously shaped. Zeus then presented Pandora with a sealed jar. Not a box, as the mistranslation of history would have it, but a large, intricately decorated clay jar, much like those used for storing grain or wine. His warning was clear and stern. Pandora arrived in the household of Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, whose name ironically meant afterthought. Epimetheus, less prescient and far more impulsive than his brother, welcomed Pandora without hesitation, captivated by her beauty and charm completely. The sealed jar sat quietly in their home. It was beautiful, certainly, but it pulsed with an unsettling mystery, a silent invitation to the very curiosity Zeus had gifted her. Pandora's days were filled with domestic tasks, with the simple rhythms of early human life, but her mind constantly returned to the jar. One quiet afternoon, perhaps when Prometheus was away, she reached for the jar. Her fingers traced the sealed lid, hesitated then. With a deep breath, she broke the seal. From within the jar, there didn't merely emerge things. There exploded a torrent of miseries. Yet from the very depths of the jar, even amidst the receding tendrils of darkness, she heard something else. Something soft and steady, a gentle hum against the cacophony of sorrow. It was hope, the last thing in the jar, the only thing that had not managed to escape before she slammed the lid shut, chained to his mountain peak. Prometheus, enduring his eternal torment, would sometimes close his eyes. Humans, meanwhile, evolved quickly, guided by that stolen fire and the enduring ember of hope. Fire allowed them to settle to cook, to forge tools of increasing sophistication from bronze and then iron. They began to sing to create rituals around the comforting glow of the hearth. They danced, married. In time, even Zeus from his Olympian throne came to realize that the humans would not be wiped away. They were tenacious, adapting, enduring. They prayed, they cursed, they stumbled, but they kept building, and their fires never went out. These stories, these early myths of creation and consequence, they explained why love sometimes led to tragedy, why some suffered unjustly, why hope persisted even in the darkest of times. The myths revealed that even the gods, for all their power, were tangled in longing and fury, guilt and pride. They hurt each other. They stayed in messy marriages. They mourned what they destroyed. Having explored the cosmic dawn and humanity's fraught beginning, let us now delve into the swirling court of Olympus itself, a realm of constant drama, rumor, jealousy, and very loud arguments. If you imagine a royal family amplified by divine power and eternal life, you'll begin to grasp the chaotic, daily life of the Olympian elite. Their grand palaces, built of shimmering gold and polished. At the heart of much of this divine domestic turmoil was Zeus, king of the gods. His consistent weakness for mortal women nymphs and goddesses, and indeed occasionally things that only looked vaguely like women, was the central recurring theme of many a myth. He had eclectic tastes, employed inventive disguises to accomplish his amorous pursuits, and his timing, by all divine accounts, was simply terrible, usually culminate. Hera, queen of the gods, sat beside Zeus, a constant, sharp-eyed presence. As the goddess of marriage and family, she was understandably utterly enraged by her husband's incessant philandering. Their marriage was less a partnership and more an on. She rarely targeted Zeus directly, perhaps out of divine obligation or a deep-seated understanding of cosmic balance. Instead, her wrath, cold and precise, fell upon the women he seduced and the poor children they bore, acting as a divine, uncompromising force of consequence. This often meant banishment, torment, or the slow corrosion of. Consider the tragic story of Io, a beautiful priestess of Hera whom Zeus seduced. To hide his affair from Hera, he transformed Io into a gleaming white cow. It took the cleverness of Hermes, sent by Zeus, to free her. Hermes, ever the trickster, lulled Argus to sleep with endless stories and music, then slew him. Hera, undeterred, retaliated by sending a gadfly to torment Io. She eventually found peace and was restored to human form in Egypt, a testament to the far-reaching impact of divine squabbles. Then there was Leto, a gentle titaness, who became pregnant with Zeus's twins, Apollo and Artemis. Hera, in a fresh fury, decreed that no land under the sun should give Leto sanctuary, cursing her to wander endlessly. Imagine the torment of a pregnant woman seeking refuge. Leto wandered desperately, her suffering prolonged and immense, until she found the floating island of Delos, which, being unbound to the earth, could offer her sanctuary. There, after 9 agonies, and the story of Semele, a mortal princess from Thebes, beloved by Zeus. Hera, disguised as an old nurse, befriended Semele, planting seeds of doubt about Zeus's true nature. She convinced Semele to ask Zeus to reveal himself in his full glory, knowing that no mortal. Zeus's various unions, legitimate and illegitimate, produced a sprawling genealogy of heroes and demigods, the mighty Heracles, son of Alcmene, Perseus, son of Danae, and Helen of Troy, daughter of Leda. Human history and her vengeance, while often seemingly petty, served a cosmic purpose, reminding all divine and mortal of the absolute sanctity of marriage and family in the Olympian order, even if the king himself failed to uphold it. For all their conflict, Zeus and Hera stayed together, perhaps out of their disputes, however personal, became divine theater shaping weather politics and fate itself. Mortals caught in their dramatic crossfire rarely escaped unscathed, their lives irrevocably altered by the passions of the gods. Beyond the domestic squabbles and marital dramas of Olympus, the gods often engaged in more direct contests, shaping the mortal world with their unique blend of power and personality. One such pivotal event was the contest for the patronage of a nascent city, a coastal settlement nestled between rocky hills and the sapphire waters of the Aegean, a place that would one day. On one side stood Poseidon, lord of the sea, earth-shaker, tamer of horses, and occasional flood enthusiast. He was powerful, proud, and loud, his presence commanding his domain immense and formidable. Opposing him was Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare weaving and well-timed restraint. The challenge was simple, yet profound. Whichever deity could offer the more useful, more beneficial gift to the people would earn the city's devotion, and Poseidon, with a flourish befitting his powerful nature, strode into the city square, a natural amphitheater for such a grand display. He raised his mighty trident, its 3 prongs gleaming, and drove it deep into the solid earth. With a rumble that shook the ground, a magnificent spring of water burst forth, gushing into a new. Athena waited patiently for the murmurs to fade, her expression serene. She knelt gracefully, her movements precise and deliberate, and pressed her fingers to the dry earth. From the ground, slowly. When the gods judged the contest, the decision was clear. Athena was declared the victor. The city was named Athens in her honor, a city that would become the cradle of philosophy, democracy, and art. It wasn't just a win for the city, but a subtle yet profound shift in the mythological landscape, emphasizing strategic thought over raw power. Athena's broader influence extended far beyond this single victory. She became a symbol of something new, a goddess who embodied practical wisdom, knowledge. She shaped not just the physical world, but the very development of music, mathematics, and philosophy. She was not a goddess of comfort or easy answers, but one who inspired and challenged mortals to think harder, build better, and question deeper. Her favor came not to the strongest, but to the clever, the disciplined, and the bold, and she watched over them. Yet even a goddess of wisdom could be provoked especially by hubris. Enter Arachne, a young woman whose weaving was so extraordinary, so exquisitely detailed, that her tapestries shimmered with life, appearing almost divine. People traveled miles to see her work, and she, with a quiet confidence that bordered on arrogance, welcomed them. But her confidence, Athena, hearing the claim, appeared to Arachne in disguise, an old woman stooped with time, her voice soft but firm. She warned Arachne to be careful of her pride, reminding her that even the greatest talent must acknowledge its divine source. But Arachne, blinded by her own skill, arrogantly dared Athena herself to a contest. Athena, her disguise dropping like... The weaving contest between Athena and Arachne was not merely a display of skill, it was a silent, intense battle of wills and perspectives. Athena, as a goddess of wisdom and craftsmanship, set about her task with the deliberate precision that defined her. Her tapestry depicted the gods in all their glory, regal and wise. Arachne, meanwhile, wove something profoundly different. Her tapestry, though equally flawless in its execution, told a far more challenging truth. With daring honesty, she depicted the gods' mistakes, their petty rivalries, their jealousies, and their cruelties. She showed Zeus in his many disguises, pursuing mortal women with blatant disregard for his vows. When both tapestries were complete, laid out for judgment, Athena found no fault in Arachne's weaving. It was perfect, technically beyond reproach, and it was insulting not because it was false, but precisely because it was true. Athena's anger flared not with jealousy over Arachne's skill, for Athena recognized true talent, but with disappointment and a profound sense of the hubris of a mortal daring to expose. With a single touch, a gesture both divine and decisive, Athena transformed Arachne, not into a monster, but into the first spider. Eight-legged, quick-fingered Arachne was condemned to forever weave in silence her intricate webs, a perpetual reminder of her extraordinary talent and her terrible pride. Her descendants would continue the craft, spinning delicate. Under Athena's watchful eye, Athens, the city she had won with the olive tree, truly began to flourish. It became the cradle of philosophy, democracy, and art. The olive tree in the Acropolis remained a quiet, enduring reminder of the day wisdom bested force, a living symbol of the city's. Now let us turn our attention to the radiant twins Apollo and Artemis, whose very birth was steeped in the lingering animosity of Hera. Born to the gentle Titaness, Leto, Apollo, the first to emerge, was radiant, golden, charismatic, even as a newborn, his eyes gleaming like sunrise. He was destined to become the god of the sun, music, healing, prophecy, poetry, and less humbly, being correct at all times. Apollo's first significant act underscored his fierce, vengeful nature. He sought revenge on the monstrous serpent Python, a creature sent by Hera to hound his mother Leto during her tormented pregnancy. Armed with a magnificent silver bow crafted by Hephaestus, Apollo pursued the beast, loosing arrow after arrow until Python collapsed, defeated. Over the site of his victory, Apollo erected a new... Apollo was radiant. Yes, but he was not gentle. His light could warm the soul or burn it to ashes, and his affections, like his wrath, were notoriously difficult to extinguish. He demanded absolute respect, and those who dared to challenge him, or those who simply crossed his path at the wrong moment, often paid a terrible price. Apollo's divine authority and sometimes volatile nature were perfectly illustrated in his encounter with Eros, the mischievous winged god of desire, not the primal Eros of creation, but Aphrodite's son Cupid. Apollo, ever confident in his skill, boasted to Eros about his archery prowess, subtly implying that Eros's tiny arrows were no match for his. Apollo, overcome by the golden arrow's effect, pursued Daphne with the relentless energy of a golden retriever driven by an overwhelming desire that she could not reciprocate. Daphne, terrified by his advances, fled her desperate pleas, reaching her father, the river god Perseus. Just as Apollo's eager fingers brushed her skin, Apollo wept, embracing the newly formed tree, and declared the laurel his sacred tree, forever adorning his lyre and his brow with its leaves. It was a poignant reminder that some things, even when pursued by a god, do not want to be caught, and that beauty, once touched by unwanted desire, can seek refuge in transformation. The story of Apollo and Daphne encapsulates the Artemis. Apollo's twin was less easily tricked, fiercely independent, and eternally pursued by those who misunderstood her quiet strength. She roamed the forests with her band of maiden huntresses, her bow ever ready. The story of Actaeon serves as a stark warning against unwitting transgression. Actaeon, a young hunter, stumbled upon Artemis bathing in a secluded sacred glade. He saw her in all her unadorned divine glory, and she saw him. With the duality of these twins, Apollo of the sun music prophecy and healing heat, Artemis of the moon, the hunt silent forests and cool shadows, was not one of simple opposition. Rather, they were complements, light and coolness music, and motion fury and form. Apollo's complexity was particularly striking. He could heal, but he could also curse. He flayed the satyr Perseus alive for daring to challenge him to a music contest, a brutal. Artemis, too, embodied contradictions. She aided women in childbirth, easing their pain, yet she demanded their silence and reverence in her forests. She blessed the hunt, ensuring its success, but fiercely protected animals from cruelty and unnecessary slaughter. Despite the pantheon's frequent conflicts and shifting loyalties, there was a strange and tender bond between the twins Apollo and Artemis. They remained close, two halves of a divine whole sun and moon prophecy and instinct, fury and grace. Their relationship their stories, often tragic and violent, served as powerful moral lessons, shaping the ancient Greek understanding of justice, punishment, and the delicate relationship between mortals and the divine. They were not simply tales of supernatural beings, but profound explorations of human nature, hubris, and the inescapable reach of fate. As the age of the Olympians settled into its rhythm and humanity, for all its suffering, continued to progress with the aid of fire and hope, the world found a certain pattern. Yet beneath the rituals and hymns, beneath the burgeoning cities and the quiet hearths, the subsequent Silver Age marked a clear time of decline. The new race of men, though longer of limb and perhaps more physically capable, were demonstrably shorter of temper. They began to ignore the gods, their reverence waning. They bickered over sheep-built walls to separate themselves from their neighbors, and saw the rise of pride without purpose. But the Bronze Age which followed represented a full-blown crisis in the divine eyes. If the Silver Age had been a disappointment, the Bronze Age was a catastrophe. Men learned to forge weapons, not plows, not lyres, not tools for creation, but blades designed for destruction. They carved armor. Zeus, from his Olympian throne, watched this unfolding corruption with a growing sense of divine displeasure. He had given them fire, suffered the indignity of Prometheus's defiance, and even allowed Pandora's hope to balance the sorrows she released. But this was different. And so Zeus made a terrible decision. He called upon his brother Poseidon, the Earthshaker, the Lord of the Sea. "Flood them. Zeus commanded, his voice echoing with finality. Poseidon, always eager to stretch his shoulders and swing his trident, and perhaps relishing the immense power of such a task, agreed without question. The deluge began with Poseidon stepping into the vast expanse of the ocean. He raised his trident high, its prongs shimmering with an ominous power, and drove it deep into the sea floor. The earth groaned in response. Rivers swelled, bursting their banks. Lakes spilled over, merging into vast inland seas, and the ocean itself forgot its borders, surging inland with terrifying force. Hills disappeared beneath churning gray water, then mountains, as if the bones of Gaia herself were dissolving. People climbed to the highest peaks, prayed to every god they knew. Temples collapsed, their grand structures swallowed by the swirling depths. Forests vanished, their ancient trees uprooted and swept away. Cities fell silent, their bustling streets becoming murky, watery graves. Statues of marble gods, once symbols of permanence, were washed away by the very element one of their own commanded. The rain, a relentless curtain of In the midst of this watery undoing, a profound silence descended, broken only by the sound of the rain and the churning waters. It was a silence of absolute desolation, of a world reset. But in this vast, terrifying expanse, two souls against all odds survived. These were Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion was the son of Prometheus, the foresightful Titan who had gifted humanity with fire. Pyrrha was the daughter of Prometheus, forever, one step ahead, had warned his son of the coming deluge, imparting upon him the ancient wisdom needed for survival. Following his father's counsel, Deucalion and Pyrrha built a sturdy wooden chest, simple yet strong. Eventually, as Zeus's divine wrath began to subside and Poseidon allowed the waters to recede, the chest bumped gently against something solid stone, ancient and still. It was Mount Parnassus, one of the few peaks to remain above the swirling waters, a beacon of permanence in a world transformed. Around them, the landscape was a desolate, muddy expanse, scarred by the recent cataclysm. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and the ghosts of what had been. Their isolation was absolute, a chilling realization that they were the only ones left. In their profound loneliness, and the answer came not with thunder or dramatic pronouncements, but with stillness, a voice that drifted to them on the wind, clear yet ethereal. Cover your heads, walk down the mountain, and cast the bones of your mother behind you. Deucalion. They gathered stones from the mountainside, simple unadorned rocks, ancient fragments of the earth. They veiled their heads, a gesture of reverence and humility before the profound task, and began their descent. As they walked, they cast the stones behind them, one by one, watching as they struck the muddy earth. This new race was not golden. They did not glow with the effortless perfection of the first humans, but they were durable, and crucially, they remembered. They built cautiously, with a deep respect for the elements, their homes simple but secure. They loved, fiercely appreciated. Zeus, satisfied that the rot of the previous age had been washed away, turned his gaze elsewhere, his cosmic attention drawn to other matters. Poseidon allowed the sea to settle, returning to his vast liquid dominion. Yet survival on Mount Parnassus was only the beginning. The new world born from cataclysm was not gentle. The soil was unfamiliar. The winds carried They spoke in low voices, their words hushed by the recent devastation. They built crude walls, not just for protection, but with a quiet reverence, as if the earth might reject them again, as if the waters might return. After the flood, the gods did not speak to humanity as often or as directly. This time, the world would be shaped more by mortal hands than by divine ones, a subtle shift in agency. The people who rose from the stones, in time the new world began to sing again, but with different songs, lower, softer, sung by firelight rather than shouted in grand temples. With humanity reset and the world settled into a new, albeit more sober rhythm, the focus of the grand myths shifted. While the gods still reigned from Olympus, their interactions with mortals increasingly involved individual heroes, figures who bridged the gap between the human and the divine. Often, first, let us turn to Perseus, a hero whose very birth was interwoven with prophecy and peril. His story began with his mother Danae locked away in a bronze tower by her paranoid father Acrisius, the king of Argos. An oracle had foretold that Acrisius would be killed by his grandson, a chilling prediction that fueled. Acrisius, as you might imagine, was not thrilled with either the prophecy or the divine weather patterns. Unwilling to directly kill his daughter and grandson, he had mother and son cast into the sea inside a wooden chest, hoping the ocean would do. Medusa was no ordinary monster. She was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters cursed by Athena, her once beautiful hair transformed into a writhing nest of living snakes. Her gaze, a terrifying weapon, could turn any man to stone, freezing them in a tableau of eternal horror. To face her was to. Hermes, the swift messenger, gave him winged sandals, allowing him to fly with impossible speed. Hades, ruler of the underworld, lent him a helmet of invisibility, a crown of shadow that rendered him unseen. And Athena, his half-sister, armed with these divine tools and counsel, Perseus flew unseen to the Gorgon's lair. He did not look directly at Medusa, for that would be his immediate undoing. Instead, he watched her reflection in the polished shield, a calm, inverted image. From Medusa's spilled blood, in a bizarre and unexpected burst of creation, sprang Pegasus, the magnificent winged horse, and a giant named Chrysaor. Perseus, ever cautious, placed the head in a special sack, careful not to make eye contact even post-mortem, for its power remained. On his way home, Perseus encountered another damsel in distress, though this one of royal lineage. Princess Andromeda, daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, was chained to a rock as an offering to a sea monster, a divine punishment for her mother's hubris. Perseus, with a hero's instinct, swooped down, slew the fearsome beast, and his journey continued, filled with various encounters and the use of Medusa's head to turn enemies to stone until he returned triumphantly to Argos. And here, fate, as it tends to do, fulfilled itself in the most unexpected way. Perseus, participating in an athletic contest. If Perseus was the prototype hero, Heracles, better known by his Roman name, Hercules, was the overbuilt sequel, a demigod of immense strength and tragic flaws. His legendary story began not with glory, but with rage and repentance. Driven mad by the vengeful Hera, the first task was to slay the Nemean lion, a monstrous beast with a hide so tough no blade could pierce it. Heracles wrestled the creature barehanded, a brutal, visceral struggle, eventually strangling it to death. He then skinned it with its own claws. Heracles' labors, born of Hera's relentless animosity and his own profound grief, were not merely tests of strength, but a long, arduous path to redemption. Each task pushed him to the limits of his physical prowess, cunning, and endurance, forcing him to confront not only external monsters, but also the internal demons of his past actions. After the Nemean lion, he faced the Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent with multiple heads that regrew twice whenever one was cut. this was a foe that brute force alone could not defeat. With the help of his loyal nephew, his third labor was to capture the Ceryneian hind, a golden deer sacred to Artemis, so swift it could outrun arrows and flee across vast distances. Heracles chased it for a full year, displaying not just strength, but incredible endurance and patience before gently capturing it, careful not to harm the sacred animal. This wasn't it. The list continued with increasingly daunting challenges. He had to capture the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous creature that terrorized the countryside, bringing it back alive. He confronted the Stymphalian birds, a flock of man-eating avian horrors with bronze beaks and metallic feathers, driving them away with a rattle given by Athena. One of the most famously further labors involved capturing the Cretan bull, a magnificent but wild beast, and the mares of Diomedes, man-eating horses that devoured human flesh. He journeyed to the ends of the earth to retrieve the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, a task complicated by Hera's interference. He took the cattle of the monster Geryon. Each labor was more than a feat of strength. It was a test of will, cunning, and occasionally negotiation with gods and monsters alike. By the completion of his 12 labors, Heracles had become something more than mortal, not yet a god. Following Heracles, let us consider Theseus, a hero whose grand arc, unlike Heracles' redemption story, began with a simple identity crisis. When he came of age, his mother Athra finally revealed his true parentage and led him to a massive stone. Underneath it, his father, King Aegeus of Athens, had left a sword and sandals as proof of lineage, a challenge for his future son. With a surge of newfound purpose and an almost preternatural strength, Theseus lifted the stone. His journey to his father's city was not a direct, uneventful one. Instead, it became a sort of mythological resume-building tour. Along the way, he cleared the road of various bandits and monsters who preyed on travelers, each victory adding to his growing reputation. Periphetes, the club-wielding brigand, Sinis, the pine-bender, the Crommyonian sow. But the real test came with the Minotaur, a beast that cast a dark shadow over Athens. Every 9 years, as tribute to King Minos of Crete, Athens was forced to send 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete sacrifices for the Minotaur. This creature, a horrifying hybrid of half man and half bull, Theseus, fueled by a desire to end this terrible tribute and save his people, volunteered to be one of the sacrificial youths. In Crete, his bravery and noble demeanor caught the eye of Ariadne, King Minos' daughter. Infatuated with the Athenian hero, she offered him crucial aid, 2 things that would ensure his survival: a sword sharp enough to slay the beast, and a ball of string, a clue that was the key. When he found the Minotaur at the heart of the maze, Theseus fought not with brute, senseless force, but with precision and strategic cunning, a reflection of his Athenian heritage. When the monstrous beast finally fell, the tribute would end. Theseus, following the string back into daylight, emerged triumphant, a hero in the tale of Theseus, after his triumph over the Minotaur, takes a turn towards tragedy, reminding us that even heroes, for all their strength and cunning, are fallible. Having slain the monster and freed Athens from its terrible tribute, Theseus sailed away from Crete, taking Ariadne with him. Yet, in a moment of inexplicable cruelty, or perhaps divine oversight, but the most devastating oversight occurred on his return voyage home to Athens. Before he had departed for Crete, Theseus had made a solemn promise to his aging father, King Aegeus. If he succeeded in his quest and survived, He was to his father, King Aegeus, had been watching from the cliffs of Sunium for days, his eyes strained by worry, scanning the horizon for the first glimpse of his son. And so Theseus became king not by defeating a beast or by a triumphant return, but by forgetting a simple promise, a poignant illustration of how human oversight can lead to tragic consequences. The sea where his father perished was henceforth known as the Aegean Sea, a permanent memorial to a father's despair and a son's fatal lapse of memory. Looking across these stories, Perseus, Heracles, Theseus, what truly bound these heroes when their stories were told around ancient hearths? It wasn't always the victories that people remembered most. It was the cost, the loss, the quiet moments of reflection after the battle. It was the agony of Heracles' penance, the cunning required by Perseus, the tragic oversight of Theseus. These were human narratives elevated to myth. And the monsters, too, were never These hero narratives provided a framework for understanding human virtue and vice. They demonstrated that even divine blood didn't guarantee. And now, let us shift our focus from the active, often tumultuous lives of heroes and gods to a more abstract, yet utterly inescapable aspect of the Greek cosmos, the Fates. These three sisters were not deities in the traditional sense, worshipped in temples with sacrifices, but rather ancient primordial beings, whose Clotho. The youngest of the three was the spinner. Her fingers, as gentle as they were absolute, spun each soul into being, pulling forth the thread of life from an unseen source. Legacies, the middle sister, then took those threads and measured them. Her eyes gleamed with a quiet knowing as she determined how long a life would be, how strong its thread would be, how entangled it might become with others. She decided the allotted portion of good and ill fortune, the triumph. And then there was Atropos, the eldest and sternest. She held the shears sharp and decisive. When she cut the thread, it was final. There was no arguing, no bargaining, no appeal. Their presence, unseen but omnipresent, provided an ultimate explanation for the inexplicable, a cosmic order that even the most powerful gods acknowledged. The Fates, these ancient, silent weavers of destiny, provided a comforting, if sometimes stark, explanation for the arbitrary nature of life and death. Their presence meant that even in a world ruled by capricious gods, there was an underlying immutable order, a thread of destiny that could not be broken. This concept provided a profound philosophy beyond the grand narratives of heroes and the inescapable decrees of the Fates. Greek mythology also delved into more intimate psychological dramas, cautionary tales that explored the darker aspects of human nature even when reflected through divine encounters. The story of Narcissus was a youth of unparalleled beauty. So beautiful, in fact, that entire cities paused to watch him pass. He had the kind of face poets would retire over the kind of hair that shimmered in the sunlight, inspiring gods to consider taking up new hobbies just to capture a fraction of his grace. He was truly captivating, a living statue of perfection. But beauty untempered. Into his orbit came Echo, a nymph cursed by Hera. Once, a lively, chatty nymph, Echo had been punished for distracting Hera with endless gossip, while Zeus pursued one of his many affairs. Hera, in a fit of rage, decreed that Echo could no longer start a conversation. She could only repeat the last words spoken to her. She could no longer Echo, despite her curse, fell deeply in love with Narcissus. She followed him silently through the woods, her heart aching with unexpressed devotion. When he called out, "Who's there?" she could only echo, "There." When he recoiled, frustrated by the disembodied voice, she could only repeat his words, her whispers echoing as Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance and divine retribution, observed Narcissus's cruelty and echoes. He gazed upon it, captivated, unable to look away day after day, returning to the pool mesmerized by the beautiful image that stared back at him. He could not touch it, could not embrace it, could not satisfy the longing that consumed him. Echo, for all her fading, never lost her tenderness. Her ethereal presence lingered in lonely places in the hollows of mountains and the quiet of glades. She answered not because she hoped to be heard, not because she sought to initiate, but because some part of her... Another story, equally profound, but far more tender, is that of Pygmalion and Galatea, a narrative that explores the power of desire and the capacity for love to breathe life into the inanimate. Pygmalion was a sculptor, a quiet man who, disillusioned by the flaws and complexities of mortal women, stopped seeking love from human beings. He found them too loud, too fickle. He began to carve his ideal perfect woman from ivory, working for days, weeks, months, with meticulous devotion. He sculpted her with a profound level of detail, with eyes soft but unblinking, lips poised but silent. She was everything he desired in a companion, beautiful, serene, eternally unchanging. When he finished, he was ruined. Not financially, but emotionally, spiritually. She was beautiful, too. Beautiful. And she didn't Aphrodite, the goddess of desire and beauty, who presided over all matters of the heart, took pity on him. Perhaps she saw in his desperate longing a mirror of her own power, or perhaps she simply felt a rare moment of compassion for a mortal consumed by such pure, if misplaced, love. Galatea, he called her, sleeping white, and she looked back at him, her gaze filled with understanding, her lips parting to whisper his name. The story of Pygmalion and Galatea, in its quiet beauty, holds a unique place among the often dramatic myths. It wasn't meant to teach a harsh lesson or warn against hubris. Instead, it was there to hold something else, some flickering hope. These tales, whether of grand cosmic battles, tragic heroes, or intimate human failings, illustrate a crucial point. Greek mythology was never meant to be tidy. It contradicts itself. It bends it, forgets details. It shifts perspectives across different tellings. But that precisely is what makes it so human, so enduring. These were not just stories about gods and their grand adventures. They were profound mirrors held up to us, to humanity. They showed what happened when we loved too deeply or too carelessly, when we reached for more than we should, when we defied fate or surrendered to its embrace. And these stories were not confined to the grand temples or the pronouncements of oracles. While the gods may have had their magnificent temples, their marble statues, and their elaborate sacrificial rituals, it was in the quiet corners of ancient... Even now, millennia later, they persist. You can find echoes of these ancient tales in the constellations overhead, their star patterns still bearing the names of heroes and beasts. The very words we use, like narcissist, for self-obsession hygiene, derived from Hygeia, the goddess of health, or chaos itself, are direct descendants of these myths. They permeate our art, our poetry, our literature, and even we still long, like Pygmalion, yearning for an ideal that may or may not be attainable. We still echo like the nymph in the woods, sometimes feeling unheard or unable. For all their immortal glory, the gods were never far from mortal emotion. They were tangled in longing and fury, guilt and pride. They hurt each other. They stayed in messy marriages and they mourned what they destroyed. This human quality in their divine narrative, as we settle deeper into the quiet hum of these ancient narratives, let us further explore the nuanced relationship between mortals and the gods, recognizing that divine intervention was not always grand and dramatic, but often subtle, shaping the very cultural currents and philosophical underpinnings of Greek society. The myths weren't just tales of conflict and power. Consider the role of the oracle at Delphi, the most famous voice of prophecy in the ancient world, presided over by Apollo. Imagine yourself. These prophecies were rarely straightforward. They were riddles, veiled warnings, or ambiguous statements that required careful interpretation by the priests and then by the petitioner themselves. This ambiguity was not a flaw. The very concept of civic life and the burgeoning of democracy in cities like Athens were implicitly influenced by the narratives of even warfare. A grim and constant reality of ancient life was imbued with mythological significance. Generals would consult omens, interpret bird flights, and make sacrifices before battle, seeking the favor of Ares or Athena. The outcome of a skirmish might. The arts, too, were deeply intertwined with myth. Think of the theater, the very origin of which lies in the ecstatic worship of Dionysus. The tragedies, music often played on the lyre was directly linked to Apollo. The Muses' divine sisters inspired poets, singers, and dancers. Sculpture and architecture weren't just practical constructions. Moreover, the Greeks often used myths as a form of social commentary, subtly critiquing power, exploring ethical dilemmas, and even questioning the justice of the divine. The portrayal of Zeus's promiscuity, for example, as we settle deeper into the quiet hum of these ancient narratives, let us further explore the nuanced relationship between mortals and the gods, recognizing that divine intervention was not always grand and dramatic, but often subtle, shaping the very cultural currents and philosophical underpinnings of Greek society. Consider the role of the oracle at Delphi, the most famous voice of prophecy in the ancient world, presided over by Apollo. Imagine yourself as a seeking pilgrim traveling for days or weeks across rugged terrain, perhaps endure. These prophecies were rarely straightforward. They were riddles, veiled warnings, or ambiguous statements that required careful interpretation by the priests, and then the very concept of civic life and the burgeoning of democracy in cities like Athens were implicitly influenced by the narratives of the gods. Athena, as we explored, embodied the values of strategic thought, reasoned debate, and the pursuit of even warfare. A grim and constant reality of ancient life was imbued with mythological significance. Generals would consult omens, interpret bird flights, and make sacrifices before battle, seeking the favor of Ares or Athena. The outcome of the arts, too, were deeply intertwined with myth. Think of the theater, the very origin of which lies in the ecstatic worship of Dionysus. The tragedies performed in amphitheaters where thousands would gather were not simply entertainment. Music often played on the lyre was directly linked to Apollo. The Muses' divine sisters inspired poets, singers, and dancers. Sculpture and architecture weren't just Moreover, the Greeks often used myths as a form of social commentary, subtly critiquing power, exploring ethical dilemmas, and even questioning the justice of the divine. The philosophical underpinnings of Greek mythology stretched far beyond mere explanations for natural phenomena or the origins of human suffering. They provided a profound framework for understanding the human psyche, the nature of cosmic justice, and the delicate balance between free will and predetermined fate. Take, for instance, the concept of hubris. This wasn't merely pride in the modern sense. It was an extreme, often arrogant overstepping of human boundaries, a defiance of the natural order, or a direct challenge to the gods. Conversely, the concept of xenia or sacred hospitality was deeply ingrained and often illustrated through divine stories. Zeus himself was the patron of Xenia, and the very geography of Greece was infused with myth. Every city, mountain, river, and island held a story, a connection to a god or hero. The Acropolis in Athens wasn't just a hill. It was the sun. Furthermore, Greek mythology provided a rich vocabulary for understanding complex emotions and psychological states. The Furies born from the blood of Uranus personified vengeance. The relationship between the divine and the natural world was another crucial aspect. Unlike some monotheistic traditions where nature is merely a creation in Greek mythology, the gods were nature or embodied its forces. Poseidon was the sea itself, Zeus the sky and its storms, Demeter the earth's fertility. This intimate connection meant that disrespecting nature could be seen as disrespecting a god. Even the concept of death, often a terrifying unknown, was made comprehensible, if not entirely comforting, through the myths of the underworld. Hades' realm, with its various rivers and sections like Elysium for the blessed and Tartarus for the damned, provided a structured afterlife. The journey across the Styx, continuing our journey through the intricate tapestry of Greek mythology, it's worth dwelling on how these powerful narratives shaped the very concept of heroism and individual destiny within a larger cosmic framework. While the gods often played a decisive role, the myths also emphasized the human capacity for striving for endurance and for making. Consider the pervasive influence of the hero cults. Beyond the grand Olympian temples, many local communities celebrated specific heroes figures like Heracles, Theseus, or even local founders as semi-divine beings. These cults involved rituals, games. The concept of the demon, a divine spirit or guiding force, was another subtle but significant aspect. Sometimes personified, sometimes an internal impulse, a demon could be a source of inspiration or a harbinger of doom. Socrates famously spoke of his own demon as a voice that warned him against. The very structure of the myths often involved genealogies so complex that they would make a modern family tree look like a simple twig. These intricate lineages, tracing descent from gods, titans, and primordial beings, served a crucial purpose beyond mere narrative flair. They established social hierarchies, justified claims. Moreover, the myths offered fascinating insights into ancient Greek attitudes towards intelligence and cunning. While strength was lauded particularly in figures like Heracles, the Greek myths also subtly explored concepts of cyclical time and renewal. The story of the Great Flood, for instance, represents a cataclysmic end, but also a renewal, a chance for humanity to begin again, albeit with the hard-won wisdom of survival. Finally, the sheer variety of the myths themselves speaks volumes about the ancient Greek imagination. There wasn't a single monolithic sacred text. Instead, there was a vast evolving body of stories, constantly being reinterpreted, retold, and even subtly altered by poets, playwrights, and to truly grasp the immersive nature of Greek mythology, we must consider how it permeated the very systems of knowledge and wellness in the ancient world, shaping both formal education and the deeply personal experience of health and healing. The myths weren't merely stories. For the children of ancient Greece, particularly boys from more privileged families, education began not with dry historical facts or complex mathematical equations, but girls, though often educated at home, would also absorb these stories, understanding the roles of women like Penelope Helen or Hecuba, learning lessons about loyalty, beauty, and suffering through their mythical counterparts. The myths, therefore, laid the foundation for an entire civilization's moral and ethical framework. Beyond moral instruction, the myths influenced practical knowledge. Even rudimentary medicine and healing were often seen through a divine lens. Asclepius, the god of medicine, son of Apollo, was venerated across Greece. His cult center. Imagine a sick individual suffering from a mysterious ailment traveling to one of these sites. They would undergo purification rituals, offering prayers and sacrifices, and then, crucially, sleep within the sacred precinct. During this incubation, the unique identity of each Greek city-state was also inextricably tied to its patron deities and founding myths. Athens had Athena and Theseus. Sparta claimed Heracles. Corinth honored Poseidon. Delphi was the domain of Apollo. And while the myths often explored grand, tragic themes, they also contained a subtle, understated wit, a dry humor that reflected a nuanced understanding of human. Ultimately, the enduring power of Greek mythology lies not just in its individual stories or characters, but in the archetypes it created: the tragic hero, the vengeful queen, the wise elder, the innocent victim. These archetypes transcend their original narratives, becoming universal patterns that resonate across culture. As we reach the quiet conclusion of our journey through the vast, intricate landscape of Greek mythology, it becomes clear that these stories were far more than ancient tales. They were, in essence, a profound philosophy, an enveloping. The Greek pantheon, as we've seen, was a collection of powerful, often capricious beings, yet they were profoundly relatable in their flaws and passions. Zeus, the king, was prone to infidelity and explosive anger, yet he was also the arbiter of justice. The concept of fate woven by the Moirai, or fates, was not always seen as a tyrannical force. While it dictated the ultimate end, it also provided a profound sense of order in a chaotic world. It meant that even the greatest tragedy or the most unexpected stroke of luck. Moreover, the myths provided powerful psychological narratives. The journey of the hero, fraught with trials and transformations, mirrored the personal struggles and growth that every individual faces. The descent into the communal aspect of these myths cannot be overstated. They were a shared cultural heritage binding communities together. When citizens gathered for festivals, for dramatic performances, or simply to recount stories by the hearth, they were participating in a collective act of remembering and reinforcing their shared identity. As the millennia passed, the physical temples may have crumbled, the specific rituals may have faded, but the stories themselves persisted. They journeyed through Roman adaptations, medieval retellings, Renaissance revivals, and continue to resonate in our modern world. They remind us that love in its purest form can bring stone to life, as with Pygmalion. They warn us of the perils of unbridled self-admiration, as seen with Narcissus. Vô tâm vá vượt quá màn ký tự.